She sits at the kitchen table with her coffee growing cold in her hands, staring at the clock on the wall as it ticks past 11 o'clock at night. The house is quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of wind outside, pushing against the windows. She's been waiting for him to come home for the past 3 hours, ever since he texted her saying he'd be late at the office finishing up a project. But something about the tone of his message felt different, felt rushed, felt like he was lying. The kitchen light casts long shadows across the empty dining room, and she can't shake the feeling that something fundamental has shifted between them, that something unspoken and dangerous has entered their marriage. This is the third night this week that he's come home after midnight. Last Monday, it was a client emergency. Tuesday was a conference call with the West Coast office. And Wednesday was supposed to be drinks with his co-workers to celebrate closing a major deal. But tonight is Friday, and the pattern is becoming impossible to ignore. She remembers when they first got married 7 years ago, how he used to text her constantly throughout the day, how he couldn't wait to get home to see her. She remembers how he'd rush through projects just so he could leave the office on time, how he'd prioritize their time together above almost everything else. Now she can barely get him to look at his phone when he's home, and when he is home, he's distant and distracted, his mind clearly somewhere else entirely. She hears the sound of his car pulling into the driveway at 11:47 p.m., and she straightens in her chair, trying to compose herself, so she doesn't seem like she's been sitting here waiting for him all night. She listens as he fumbles with his keys at the front door, then walks into the house with his typical routine of dropping his bag by the entrance and loosening his tie. He seems surprised to see her still awake in the kitchen, and for just a moment, something flickers across his face, guilt perhaps, or worry that she's noticed something is wrong. He asks her why she's still up, his voice casual, but with an underlying tension she can detect. She tells him she couldn't sleep, that she was worried about him working so late. She watches his face carefully as he responds, noting how he avoids making direct eye contact with her, how his jaw tightens slightly when she mentions her concern. He says it's nothing to worry about, that work has just been demanding lately, that they're trying to close some big contracts before the end of the quarter. His explanation sounds rehearsed, like he's prepared this exact response in advance, knowing that she would ask questions. She nods along and tells him she understands, but she doesn't really understand anything anymore because the man standing in front of her doesn't feel like her husband. She notices small details about him that she hasn't paid attention to in weeks. His hair looks freshly cut, something he hasn't bothered to do in months, always saying he didn't have time for the barber. His shirt is pristine and unwrinkled, not like someone who spent the entire day in a stressful office environment. There's a faint smell of cologne on him, expensive and sophisticated, not the standard drugstore brand he usually wears. His shoes are polished to a shine, and his fingernails look like they've been professionally manicured. These are the details of a man who is taking care of himself, who is trying to look good, and she knows with absolute certainty that he's not doing this for her. She asks him casually if he got a haircut, and she watches as something in his expression shifts. He touches his hair self-consciously and says, yeah, he got one during his lunch break because he was starting to look unkempt. But his voice wavers slightly on that last word, and she can see a bead of perspiration forming on his temple despite the cool temperature of the kitchen. He's nervous. He's definitely hiding something. She presses a little harder and asks if he went somewhere else during lunch, if he went to a new barber, because his usual place is nowhere near his office. He snaps at her slightly, asking why she's suddenly interrogating him about every little thing he does, saying that he stopped at a barber he found online and that it shouldn't matter. Over the next week, the pattern intensifies and becomes even more obvious. He comes home late every single night, each time with a different excuse. Another client emergency, an unexpected meeting that ran over time, a team dinner that he forgot to mention. But each time he comes home, he looks polished and put together in a way that doesn't match the story of a man stressed out and overworked at the office. His clothes are fresh despite supposedly working all day. His cologne is heavy and noticeable, something he would never wear if he'd been in back-to-back meetings. His phone is constantly buzzing, and he steps away from her every time it rings or vibrates, taking the call in another room with the door closed. She starts paying attention to the small behavioral changes that she might have missed before. He showers when he gets home now, something he never used to do, always preferring to shower in the morning before work. He's showering at night, and taking an extraordinarily long time doing it, sometimes 30 or 40 minutes, which is unusual for someone who normally likes to get ready and relax. She hears him in the bathroom, and she wonders if he's washing away evidence of his day, if he's trying to remove the smell of another woman's perfume from his body. She feels physically ill at the thought, but she can't stop her mind from spiraling into that dark place. One night, she walks into their bedroom while he's in the shower and finds his phone sitting on the nightstand, buzzing with notifications. Her heart pounds as she looks at it, knowing she shouldn't pick it up, knowing that invading his privacy will cross a line that she can't uncross. But the need to know is overwhelming, crushing her with its intensity. She picks up the phone and tries to open it, but it's password protected, locked behind a security code she doesn't know. She feels a surge of anger and hurt wash over her because he's never kept his phone locked before, never needed a password with her. He used to leave his phone out all the time, completely open and accessible, never having anything to hide. She tries several combinations, her birthday, their anniversary, their wedding date, but none of them work. The phone stays stubbornly locked, protecting whatever secrets are stored inside it. She hears the shower turn off and quickly puts the phone back exactly where she found it, her hands shaking as she moves away from the nightstand. When he emerges from the bathroom, he finds her sitting on the edge of the bed pretending to read, but her eyes aren't actually tracking the words on the page. He doesn't seem to notice anything amiss, just goes through his typical evening routine of getting dressed and checking his phone again. She decides that she needs more concrete evidence, that she needs to know for certain what's happening rather than just suspecting based on behavioral changes and instincts. She starts researching how to track his phone location, feeling guilty and invasive as she does it, but also feeling justified because something is clearly very wrong. She finds an app that allows her to track his location in real time, and she downloads it on her phone using her own login credentials and connects it to his phone without his knowledge. She tells herself she's not being paranoid, that anyone in her situation would do the same thing when they sense their marriage falling apart. The next day, she watches his location move across the city map on her phone throughout the day. It starts at his office building downtown as expected, but then at 2:47 p.m., it moves away from the office and heads toward the residential neighborhood on the east side of the city. She watches the stop at a specific address, and her heart begins to race as she realizes this is not a place she recognizes. It's not a restaurant, not a friend's house, not anywhere she can explain. The dad stays in that location for exactly 45 minutes before moving again, this time heading to a coffee shop across town. She drives to that residential address, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turn white. She finds herself in front of a small apartment complex, the kind of place that seems designed for young professionals or people in transitional phases of their lives. She parks her car across the street and stares at the building, trying to figure out which apartment he went to, trying to understand what business he could possibly have in a residential building in the middle of his workday. She considers going to the door and knocking, demanding to know what's happening, but she stops herself because she realizes she doesn't actually want to know the answer if it confirms her worst fears. She sits in her car for almost an hour, frozen between the desire to confront him and the terror of learning the truth. She thinks about their marriage, about the vows they took, about the life they've built together over the past 7 years. She thinks about his family, her family, their mutual friends, the life they've constructed together. She thinks about how much it would hurt if he's actually having an affair, if he's been seeing someone else behind her back. She thinks about how angry she would feel, how betrayed, how utterly and completely devastated. But she also realizes that not knowing is slowly destroying her from the inside out, eating away at her peace of mind and her sense of security. She decides to confront him when he gets home that evening. She'll ask him directly where he was at 2:47 p.m. today, watch his face when she asks the question, see if his answer matches reality, or if he lies to her again. She spends the entire afternoon building up her courage, rehearsing what she's going to say, preparing herself for whatever response he might give. When he finally comes home at his usual late hour, she's sitting at the kitchen table waiting for him, her body rigid with tension and anticipation. She can see immediately that something is different about tonight, that he senses something is wrong the moment he walks through the door. She doesn't waste time with small talk or casual conversation. She asks him directly where he was today at 2:47 p.m. She watches as his entire body goes rigid, as his face drains of all color, as panic flashes across his features. He asks her what she means, his voice tight and strained, clearly trying to figure out how much she knows. She tells him she knows he left the office early, that she knows he went to a residential address on the east side of the city. She watches him carefully, noting every micro-expression, every nervous gesture, every sign that he's about to lie to her again. For a long moment, he says nothing. He just stares at her with an expression of complete shock and resignation, like someone who's been caught red-handed with no possible way to explain what he's been doing. Then his shoulders slump, and he sits down heavily in the chair across from her. He looks at her directly in the eyes for the first time all week, and she can see something breaking in his expression. He opens his mouth to speak, closes it again, and opens it once more. And then he says the words that will change everything. "I need to tell you something, and I'm terrified you're going to hate me when you hear it." She feels her heart stop completely in her chest as she waits for him to continue. The kitchen suddenly feels very small and very quiet, like the entire world has compressed down to just the two of them and whatever confession is about to emerge. She tells him to just say it, that whatever he's been hiding, she needs to know the truth. She braces herself for the admission of an affair, for him to tell her about another woman, for her entire world to be destroyed in a single moment of honesty. She's already mentally preparing for the aftermath, for conversations with lawyers, for dividing their possessions, for starting over alone. But what comes next is not at all what she expected. He tells her that he's been offered a job opportunity, a position at a startup company that's just beginning to scale up and looking for experienced people to join their leadership team. He says that the person at that apartment is a recruiter named Michael, who's been helping him prepare for interviews and coaching him on how to present himself in the best possible light. He says that Michael is helping him build his confidence because the position would be a huge leap forward for his career, but it also means potentially leaving his current job, and he wasn't sure how to tell her. She feels a wave of relief wash over her that's so powerful it almost knocks her backward, followed immediately by a surge of confusion and anger. She asks him why on earth he would keep something like that a secret, why he would sneak around and lie to her about where he's going instead of just telling her the truth. She asks him why he was so secretive about job coaching, why he couldn't have just told her from the beginning that he was exploring new opportunities. She demands to know every detail of what's been happening, every lie he's told her, every moment he's kept her in the dark. He tells her that he was afraid, that he was terrified of getting her hopes up only to have the opportunity fall through. He explains that he's been interviewing with his company for the past 3 weeks, that they've been very interested in him, and that he had a final interview scheduled for next week. He says he wanted to wait until he knew for certain whether he'd gotten the job before telling her, that he didn't want to stress her out with uncertainty and job hunting drama. He says he knows it was wrong to keep it from her, that he should have been honest about what was happening, but he was just trying to protect her from disappointment. She sits in silence for a long moment, processing the fact that the worst fears she's been harboring all week were completely unfounded. She's been imagining an affair, imagining her marriage falling apart, imagining a future alone, when in reality her husband has just been stressed about a job opportunity. She feels simultaneously relieved and angry, grateful that he's not cheating, but furious that he thought he needed to hide this from her. She tells him that keeping secrets and lying to her was a million times worse than just telling her the truth, that she would have supported him through the interview process, that his dishonesty was far more hurtful than any uncertainty about a job would have been. He nods and accepts her criticism, telling her that he realizes now how much his secrecy hurt her, how wrong it was to make her suspicious and worried. He asks her for forgiveness, telling her that he should have trusted her enough to be honest about what was going on. He explains that Michael is actually a very good friend of his from college who he'd lost touch with for years, and when they reconnected on social media, Michael had just started this recruiting firm and offered to help him transition into a new career path. He says that he's been nervous about making such a big change, about leaving his comfortable current job for something new and uncertain. She takes a moment to process all of this information, to absorb the fact that her week of worry and suspicion was based on incomplete information and worst-case assumptions. She realizes that she let her imagination run away with her, that she jumped to conclusions without having all the facts. But she also recognizes that her husband's behavior, the secrecy, the late nights, the deception, gave her very legitimate reasons to be suspicious. She tells him that she forgives him, but that they need to establish better communication going forward, that secrets like this can destroy trust faster than almost anything else. They spend the rest of the evening talking through the job opportunity, and he tells her all the details about the position, the company, the salary range, and the benefits package. He tells her about the interview process and how impressed the company has been with his background and experience. He tells her about Michael's help in preparing him, about the coaching sessions and the practice interviews they've been doing at that apartment. She listens to him talk about the opportunity with a growing sense of excitement, realizing that this could be a really positive change for their family. She asks him questions about what the job would entail, where the company is located, whether they'd have to relocate. He tells her that the company's offices are only 45 minutes away, that they wouldn't need to move unless they decided to get a bigger house now that his income would be significantly higher. He talks about the growth potential, about how this company is backed by major venture capital firms and is positioned to become a major player in their industry within the next 5 years. He tells her about his salary projection if the company succeeds, about the stock options they're offering, about the possibility of substantial financial security that this opportunity could provide. She can see genuine excitement in his eyes for the first time in weeks, and she realizes how much this opportunity means to him. The interview happens the following week, and he comes home that evening looking both excited and nervous. He tells her that he thinks it went really well, that the interview panel seemed impressed with his answers and his vision for how he could contribute to the company. He says they're going to make a decision within the next week and will contact him with their answer. She encourages him and tells him that she believes in him, that she knows he's going to get the job because he's incredibly talented and capable. She tells him that she's proud of him for taking a risk and pursuing something new, even though it makes her nervous to think about the change ahead. The call comes on a Thursday morning while she's at work. Her husband texts her to call him immediately, and her heart jumps into her throat thinking something terrible has happened. When she calls him back, she can hear the smile in his voice immediately, and he tells her that he got the job. The company is offering him a position as Senior Vice President of Operations, starting in 1 month, with a salary that's nearly double what he's currently making. She screams with excitement and feels tears of joy streaming down her face. She can hear him crying too, tears of relief and happiness and the realization that this massive leap of faith has paid off. That evening, they celebrate by going to their favorite restaurant and ordering champagne. They talk about what this means for their future, about the possibilities that have suddenly opened up for them. They talk about potentially buying a house with a bigger backyard, about taking more vacations, about finally having the financial security they've always dreamed about. But more than that, they talk about how this experience has affected their relationship, about how the week of secrets and suspicion nearly damaged their marriage in ways they never could have predicted. She tells him that she's realized how much she was taking him for granted, how she'd become so comfortable in their routine that she'd stopped really seeing him as a person with his own dreams and aspirations. She admits that she was so focused on her own fears and anxieties that she didn't notice he was struggling with something significant. He tells her that he realizes now that keeping secrets is never the right solution, that honesty is always better than deception, no matter how scary the truth might be. They agree to make a commitment to better communication going forward, to never let secrets build walls between them again. Over the next month, they go through the transition period with her husband training his replacement at his old job while simultaneously preparing to start his new position. She's amazed by how much energy he puts into both roles, how he manages to stay positive and focused despite the stress of such a major change. She attends his final day at his old company and watches as his colleagues throw a surprise going-away party for him. She sees how much he's respected and appreciated by the people he's worked with, and it makes her proud to be his wife, proud of the man he is and the professional he's become. His first day at the new job arrives on a Monday morning, and she wakes him up early to make sure he has a good breakfast before he heads to the office. She watches him leave the house in his new suit, his hair freshly cut, his confidence radiating from him like an aura. She tells him she loves him and that she's proud of him, and he kisses her goodbye and heads out the door. That evening when he comes home, she can see that the day has been long and challenging, but his eyes are bright with the excitement of starting something new. He tells her about his new colleagues, about the projects they're working on, about the vision for how they're going to disrupt their entire industry. As the weeks pass and he settles into his new role, she notices how much happier he seems. He comes home at reasonable hours now, energized rather than drained, excited to tell her about his day instead of withdrawn and distant. The distance that had been growing between them starts to close as he begins to open up more, as they reconnect over conversations about his new challenges and opportunities. She realizes that the excitement and engagement she'd been missing in him wasn't gone. It was just being channeled into this new professional opportunity. Now that he's settled into his new job, he's able to bring that energy and presence back home to their relationship. She reflects on how differently things could have turned out if she confronted him with anger instead of curiosity, if she'd assumed the worst instead of giving him a chance to explain. She realizes that her instinct to investigate, while it made her uncomfortable and violated his privacy, ultimately led to a conversation that cleared the air and strengthened their relationship. She thinks about how many marriages end because of miscommunication and secrets, because people don't take the time to have the difficult conversations that need to be had. She's grateful that they got past this hurdle, grateful that her husband ultimately trusted her enough to be honest with her, grateful that this challenge didn't destroy them but instead made them stronger. 6 months pass, and life settles into a new rhythm that feels healthier and more connected than it did before. The scare of nearly losing their marriage due to miscommunication and secrets has taught them both valuable lessons about the importance of openness and honesty. They've become closer than they've been in years, with deeper conversations happening more frequently and a renewed sense of intimacy, both emotional and physical. But one evening, as they're sitting on their couch watching television, her husband suddenly pauses and says he needs to tell her something else, something he's been holding on to, because he was worried about how she'd react. Her stomach drops immediately at those words, because they're the same words he used when he was hiding the job opportunity. She wonders if there's another secret, if the job was somehow not what it seemed, if something else has been lurking beneath the surface. She asks him what's wrong, and she can see him struggling with how to articulate what he wants to say. He tells her that he's been in therapy, that he's been seeing a therapist for the past 4 months to work through some personal issues and patterns that he's been recognizing about himself. He tells her that the therapy is helping him understand why he thought it was necessary to keep secrets, why he has trouble being vulnerable and honest about his struggles. She feels a wave of relief, followed by concern. She's glad he's getting help, but she's worried about what issues he's been working through. She asks him what he's been talking about in therapy, what he's been trying to work through. He tells her that he's been dealing with anxiety about his career for years, that he's been struggling with perfectionism and the fear of failure. He says that when the job opportunity came up, it triggered all of these anxieties at once, and instead of reaching out to her for support, he retreated into secrecy and attempted to handle everything on his own. He tells her that the therapist has helped him understand that his tendency to keep secrets and handle things alone is rooted in his childhood, in the way his parents always emphasized independence and self-reliance over asking for help. He explains that growing up, emotions were seen as weaknesses, that vulnerability was something to be ashamed of, that asking for help was viewed as failing. He says the therapist has been helping him unlearn these patterns, helping him understand that asking for support is not weakness but rather a sign of strength and self-awareness. He apologizes to her for bringing these unhealthy patterns into their marriage, for making her suffer because of baggage he's been carrying since childhood. She listens to him talk about therapy and childhood trauma and healing with a growing sense of admiration for him. She realizes that choosing to get help, choosing to work through his issues with a professional, is actually a sign of tremendous courage and self-awareness. She tells him that she's proud of him for taking responsibility for his patterns and actively working to change them. She tells him that she wants to support him through this healing process, that they can work through these issues together. She asks if he'd be open to couples therapy as well, to give them a neutral space to work through some of the communication patterns that nearly damaged their marriage. He agrees enthusiastically, and they schedule an appointment with a couples therapist for the following week. Over the next several months, they attend therapy sessions together, and it becomes a transformative experience for both of them. They learn about communication styles, about how their different attachment patterns are affecting their relationship, about how to express needs and feelings more effectively. The therapist helps them understand that her suspicion and desire to investigate his location wasn't paranoid or controlling. It was a rational response to behavioral changes that suggested something was wrong. The therapist also helps him understand that keeping secrets and lying about his whereabouts violated her sense of security and trust. Through therapy, she learns that she has her own patterns of anxiety and hypervigilance that stem from her childhood, from growing up with a parent who was emotionally unavailable and often dishonest. She realizes that her immediate jump to assuming infidelity was connected to her own fears of abandonment and loss. She learns that these patterns are not her fault, but that she can work on them and develop healthier ways of responding to uncertainty and fear. The therapy process becomes a journey of mutual healing and understanding, a way for both of them to grow as individuals and as a couple. One evening, about 8 months into her husband's individual therapy, he comes home and tells her that he wants to tell her something very important. He says that he's been working with his therapist on some deep family secrets, and that he feels like she deserves to know the whole truth about his background. He tells her that his father had an addiction problem that wasn't discussed in the family, that his mother chose to pretend everything was fine rather than addressing the issue directly. He explains that his parents' marriage nearly fell apart multiple times due to lies and secrets surrounding the addiction, though they ultimately stayed together and the addiction was eventually treated. He tells her that witnessing his parents' marriage nearly implode due to dishonesty and secrecy created a complex relationship with truth in his own psychology. He explains that on one level, he intellectually understood the importance of honesty in relationships, but on another level, he learned from his parents that sometimes keeping secrets seemed easier than facing difficult truths. He says that keeping the job situation secret from her was not really about wanting to protect her, but about protecting himself from the shame and vulnerability of admitting that he was struggling and uncertain about his career. She listens to him share these deeply personal details about his family background with a sense of compassion and understanding. She realizes that his behavior wasn't malicious or intentionally hurtful. It was the result of patterns he'd learned growing up, patterns that his parents had modeled for him without necessarily intending to harm him. She shares her own family history with him, talking about her anxiety disorder that wasn't diagnosed until adulthood, about how her parents' lack of emotional support made her develop a hypervigilant personality. They bond over their shared experience of coming from families where emotional health wasn't prioritized and where honest communication was sometimes sacrificed for stability. Together, they make a decision to break these family patterns, to create a relationship and eventually a family that operates on the foundation of honesty, vulnerability, and open communication. They commit to never keeping secrets from each other again, to always having difficult conversations rather than avoiding them, to choosing vulnerability over the false protection of deception. They talk about the children they hope to have someday and how they want to parent differently than they were parented, how they want their kids to know that it's safe to be honest, to be vulnerable, to struggle and ask for help. A year after the initial scare of discovering his secret late nights, they celebrate his success in his new job by taking a week-long vacation to a beach resort they've always dreamed of visiting. They spend their days relaxing on the beach, swimming in the ocean, eating fresh seafood at waterfront restaurants. They spend their evenings talking late into the night, holding hands, reconnecting on a deeper level than they have since the early days of their relationship. On their final night at the resort, they sit together watching the sunset over the water, and he tells her how grateful he is that they survived that crisis, that they didn't let secrets destroy their marriage. He tells her that he's been reflecting on how close they came to losing each other, how a single week of dishonesty nearly created an irreparable breach between them. He says that if she hadn't questioned him, if she just accepted his excuses without pushing for answers, their marriage likely would have continued deteriorating in slow motion until one day they woke up as strangers living in the same house. He tells her that her refusal to accept his explanations without evidence forced him to be honest, forced them both to confront the real issues that were affecting their relationship. He thanks her for loving him enough to demand the truth, even when it would have been easier for her to just let things slide. She reflects on the past year and realizes how much they've both grown as individuals and as a couple. She's proud of her husband for taking responsibility for his patterns and actively working to change them. She's proud of herself for trusting her instincts, for investigating when something felt wrong, and for having the courage to demand honesty even when it was uncomfortable. She realizes that their marriage is now stronger than it's ever been, not despite the crisis they went through, but because of it. They learned valuable lessons about communication, about the dangers of keeping secrets, about the power of vulnerability and honesty. As they fly back home, they talk about what's next for them. They discuss the possibility of starting a family, of buying a larger house, of achieving some of the dreams they've been putting off. They talk about how his new career trajectory opens up possibilities they never had before, but they acknowledge that the money and career success matter far less than having a relationship built on trust and honesty. They make a commitment to continue therapy, both individually and as a couple, to keep working on their relationship and their personal growth. They acknowledge that they'll face challenges in the future, but they now have the tools and the commitment to face them together with honesty and open communication. Months later, she becomes pregnant, and they discover they're going to have a daughter. They're both excited and nervous about this new chapter of their lives, about the responsibility of raising a human being, about modeling the kind of healthy relationships and honest communication they've learned to value. They begin preparing for parenthood, taking classes, reading books, talking about their hopes and fears for this new phase of their lives. They talk about how they want their daughter to grow up in an environment where honesty is valued, where vulnerability is normalized, where asking for help is seen as a sign of strength rather than weakness. The night their daughter is born, he holds her in his arms for the first time, and he breaks down in tears. He tells her that he's overwhelmed by how much love he feels for this tiny person, by the weight of responsibility that comes with being a parent, by the desire to protect her and provide for her and give her everything she needs to thrive. He tells her that he's thinking about his own parents, about the ways they did their best with the tools and understanding they had, about the legacy of secrets and avoidance that he's determined to break with his daughter. He tells her that having a child makes the importance of honesty and healthy communication feel even more critical, because they're not just building a relationship, they're shaping the foundation for how their daughter will relate to people for the rest of her life. As they bring their daughter home from the hospital, she reflects on the journey that brought them to this moment. She thinks about the week of suspicion and investigation, about how close they came to losing each other, about how different their lives would be if she'd simply accepted his excuses and let the secrets continue to grow. She thinks about how his late nights and behavioral changes, while initially appearing to be signs of infidelity, were actually signs of a man struggling with anxiety and uncertainty about his career path. She thinks about how jumping to conclusions nearly destroyed them, but also how her refusal to accept deception ultimately saved them. She realizes that the story of their marriage is not a story of betrayal or infidelity, but rather a story of two people learning to communicate better, learning to face their fears and insecurities, learning to choose vulnerability and honesty over the false security of secrets. She realizes that the crisis they went through was actually a gift in disguise, an opportunity to examine their patterns and make conscious choices about what they wanted their relationship to be. She's grateful for the therapists who helped them, grateful for her own instincts that demanded the truth, grateful for her husband's willingness to do the deep work of healing and transformation. Years pass, and their daughter grows up in a home where honesty is valued and vulnerability is normalized. They teach her that it's okay to make mistakes, that it's okay to struggle, that it's okay to ask for help. They model healthy communication by having honest conversations with each other in front of her, by admitting when they're wrong, by apologizing and making repairs. They don't pretend that relationships are perfect or that people never struggle. Instead, they show her that struggle is a normal part of life and that how you handle that struggle is what matters. One day, when their daughter is 10 years old, she asks them how they met and how their love story began. They exchange a look, and her husband begins to tell her the story, not a sanitized version but the real story, about the secrets and suspicion, about the investigation and confrontation, about the therapy and healing that followed. He tells their daughter that he was scared when her mother discovered he was keeping secrets, that he was ashamed of his anxiety and uncertainty about his career. He tells her that her mother's willingness to push for truth, even when it was uncomfortable, actually saved their marriage. He tells their daughter that one of the most important lessons he's learned is that secrets grow in the dark, but honesty brings things into the light where they can be addressed. He tells her that no matter what she's going through, no matter what she's struggling with, she can always come to them with the truth, because honesty is more important than perfection. He tells her that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness, and that vulnerability is actually what connects us to the people we love. He tells her that he wants her to learn from the mistakes he made, to understand that keeping secrets and lying to people you love causes far more pain than the temporary discomfort of being honest. Their daughter listens intently, And when her father finishes telling the story, she asks why he was so scared to tell the truth. He explains that he was worried about disappointing them, about not being good enough, about not measuring up to their expectations. He tells her that it took him years of therapy to understand that perfectionism and the fear of failing often leads to dishonesty and avoidance. He tells her that he's learned that people love us not because we're perfect, but because of who we are, flaws and all. He tells her that her mother didn't leave him when she discovered his secrets. Instead, she chose to stay and work through it with him, which is what real love looks like. Their daughter grows up with this understanding of relationships and honesty deeply embedded in her psyche. She becomes someone who values truth and authenticity, who isn't afraid to be vulnerable with the people she trusts, who chooses honest communication over pretense and avoidance. She develops healthy relationship patterns based on the example her parents set, based on the lesson they learned through their crisis and their commitment to healing. Years later, when she's in her own relationships, she approaches them with the same commitment to honesty and open communication that her parents have modeled for her. Looking back on that first week of suspicion and investigation, the mother in the story is grateful for every moment of it, grateful that she trusted her instincts, grateful that she chose to demand the truth, grateful that her suspicions led to a conversation that ultimately deepened their connection. She realizes that what initially felt like the potential end of her marriage was actually the beginning of a profound transformation, both for her as an individual and for her relationship. She understands that sometimes what appears to be the worst possible scenario, discovering that your spouse is keeping secrets, is actually an opportunity for growth, for deeper communication, for building something stronger than what existed before. She thinks about all the couples who go through similar situations but handle them differently, who either avoid the difficult conversations or who let their fears and assumptions drive a permanent wedge between them. She's grateful that she had the courage to investigate, grateful that she had the wisdom to listen to her husband's explanation, grateful that they both chose to do the hard work of healing and transformation. She realizes that her marriage is now a testament to the power of honesty, vulnerability, and commitment, a living example of how facing our fears and being willing to be truthful with the people we love can actually strengthen our connections rather than destroy them. The final lesson she's learned from this experience is that marriage is not about maintaining a perfect facade or avoiding difficult truths. It's about choosing, day after day, to be honest with each other, to support each other through struggles, to grow together through challenges. It's about recognizing that secrets and deception might feel safer in the moment, but honesty and vulnerability are what actually creates safety in relationships. It's about understanding that asking for help and admitting when you're struggling is not a sign of weakness, but rather a sign of emotional maturity and self-awareness. As she watches her husband and daughter play together in their backyard, she feels a deep sense of gratitude and contentment. She's grateful for the crisis that nearly destroyed them but ultimately saved them. She's grateful for the therapists who helped them navigate the process of healing. She's grateful for her own instincts and courage. But most importantly, she's grateful for her husband's willingness to be honest, to be vulnerable, to do the hard work of examining his patterns and changing them. She's grateful that they chose each other, day after day, to build something real and authentic and true. And she knows that whatever challenges lie ahead, they'll face them together with honesty and open hearts.